Good evening. Good evening. Hey, my name is Craig Wansink. Kelly Jackson and I direct the Center for the Study of Religious Freedom here at Virginia Wesleyan. Thank you so much for taking time out of your schedules to join us. We know you have other ways to spend your time, know you have other options with your time. We really appreciate you being here. This is the Cookson Religious Freedom Lecture tonight. Dr. Catharine Cookson was the founding director of the center, and since her untimely death in 2004, we've sought to honor her memory through an annual lecture, and we're just very, very pleased that you all could be here. Thank you. Two quick thoughts. This is sponsored in part by the Lighthouse here at Virginia Wesleyan, and we're grateful for that support. But also want to mention, this is the first broadcast of a lecture that we've done at Virginia Wesleyan University tonight. It is tonight. So you're a part of history. And if you may be thinking, well, I could have just stayed in my pajamas and experienced the lecture at home. So you could have. A few months ago, I read this book. It was called Escape from North Korea. Just a spellbinding book. I took it. I was flying back to Iowa, read it on the plane, and I just couldn't put it down. I just thought it was so engaging. The author, I found out, was Melanie Kirkpatrick, who's a journalist, a writer, former deputy editor of the Wall Street Journal, very active in issues relating to foreign policy and human rights and Asia and the Pacific. She spent 10 years in Asia working for the Wall Street Journal, Asia in Hong Kong, and prior to that for a division of Time Life Books in Tokyo. And she's also received the 2001 Mary Morgan Hewitt Award for Women in Journalism. It's an award that recognizes a journalist who has demonstrated commitment, hard work, and expanding influence throughout her career. That was 17 years ago, and there was like a Lifetime Achievement Award, so you must have been like 14 at the time. This is really great. Her most recent book just came out last year. It's called Thanksgiving, the holiday at the heart of the American experience, and we're very honored that Melanie Kirkpatrick is joining us. Of course, her presence here is timely. A couple of days ago, North Korea launched an ICBM. 8 days ago, a North Korean guard's bullet-ridden and parasite-filled body escaped into South Korea. And Kim Jong-un uses words like dotard in ways that not only expand our vocabulary, but continue to keep relations icy between our countries. This evening, we are not going to be able to deal with all things North Korean, but we're glad that you can join us on a journey that focuses in part on the hell of escaping North Korea, only to end up in China, and then having to figure out how to escape China. Escape from North Korea, the untold story of Asia's Underground Railroad. Please welcome Melanie Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Craig, and good evening, everybody. It's great to see such a wonderful turnout. I really appreciate the work that Kelly and Craig are doing here at the Center for the Study of International Religious Freedom. And I'm honored to be delivering a lecture in memory of Catharine Cookson, the founding director of the center. She was an advocate of interfaith dialogue and a scholar of religious freedom. And I very much regret I never had the chance to meet her. I know I could have learned a lot from her. My topic tonight is Christianity, North Korea, and the new Underground Railroad. And while I'll be focusing on those issues when it comes time for Q&A, I'd be happy to hear your questions on all things North Korea and answer them to the best of my ability. When the Center for the Study of Religious Freedom was founded in 1998, the world knew next to nothing about life in North Korea. Few foreign visitors were allowed to enter the country, and only a tiny number of North Koreans, mostly diplomats, were given permission to leave. As for North Koreans, the only information about the outside world that was available to them was what the Kim regime chose to tell them. It was, and it remains, a crime to leave the country without official permission. The world's lack of knowledge about life in North Korea extended to the practice of Christianity. which had a long history in Korea before the founding of the Democratic People's Republic, the country's official name. Christianity was especially popular in the northern part of the country, where Protestant ministers were active. In the early part of the 20th century, Pyongyang was home to so many Christians that it was known by the nickname the Jerusalem of the East. During the Korean War in the early 1950s, many Christians fled to the south, hoping to escape persecution from Kim Il-sung's communist regime. After the Korean War, Kim Il-sung mostly eradicated Christianity from North Korea through a brutal policy of murdering religious leaders, imprisoning believers who would not recant, and banishing others to remote regions of the country. The few Christians who survived and practice their religion in secret today are often referred to as catacomb Christians, a reference to the burial places of the early Christian martyrs in Rome. In recent years, however, we've come to know a great deal about life in North Korea, including religious life. For this, we can thank the North Koreans who have dared to escape from their country. And we can also thank the humanitarian workers, often Christians, who work with North Koreans who are hiding in China. I will return to these escapees and their Christian rescuers in a few minutes. First, though, let me say a few words about religious freedom in North Korea. I can sum up the state of affairs in a single short statement of fact. There is none. Zero. North Korea is a totalitarian communist state, and while North Korea's constitution guarantees freedom of worship, that is not the case in practice. It is dangerous to practice any faith in North Korea, I should say. Those who are suspected of being Christian or Buddhist or members of a native animist religion are imprisoned and sometimes executed. The international nonprofit organization Open Doors has ranked North Korea as the worst place on earth for Christians. North Korean Christians must hide their faith completely from the government authorities, Open Borders notes, and sometimes even from family members. In an article I wrote for the Wall Street Journal, I recounted one of the saddest stories I have ever heard of the dangers of practicing one's faith in North Korea. The article was titled "The Bible in the Bird's Nest." And in it, I told about a family that hid their Bible in a magpie's nest, perched in a tree near their home. The family had been Christian since before the founding of the Kim family regime and had worshipped in secret for more than half a century. When a neighbor cut a branch off the tree and the family's Bible was discovered, 3 generations of the family disappeared. In the words of the refugee who reported this story, the Christians were sent to a, quote, place of no return. North Korea, by the way, has a policy of generational punishment, whereby a political crime, such as possession of a Bible, is punished by the imprisonment of the offender's parents and children, as well as himself. The only so-called worship that is permitted in North Korea is that of the Kim family, the founder Kim Il-sung, his son Kim Jong-il, and his grandson Kim Jong-un, the current dictator of the country. I'll give you a few examples of this Kim family worship. Every North Korean adult wears a badge on his heart, displaying a photograph of the smiling face of the founder, Kim Il-sung. Citizens are required to adhere to a national belief system promoted by Kim Il-sung called Juche. All citizens must attend group meetings where they listen to readings from the works of Kim Il-sung, sit through sermons on the meanings of Juche philosophy, and participate in self-criticism sessions. Even calendar dates are expressed in Juche years, with year 1 being 1912, the year of Kim Il-sung's birth. Large framed photographs of Kim Il-sung and his son Kim Jong-il hang in places of honor in every home. Propaganda videos from North Korea show citizens bowing down before these photographs, and there are reports of citizens who have been punished for neglecting to dust them properly. When I was researching my book, Escape from North Korea, I interviewed a family of escapees at their home in Rochester, New York. At one point during our interview, the father pointed to a photograph of himself and his family that was hanging on the wall. In America, he told me proudly, he can choose what photograph to display on his wall. This was a freedom he did not have in his home country. With this as background, then, let me turn to the topic of the new Underground Railroad. The Underground Railroad across Asia is a metaphor for the escape route that courageous North Koreans ride out of North Korea and across the vast country of China to freedom in South Korea or the West. If you look at a map, it would seem obvious that a North Korean who wished to reach South Korea should head south, not to China. But in the upside world down of North Korea, a traveler cannot go south because he would have to cross the DMZ, the demilitarized zone between the two Koreas. Despite its name, the demilitarized zone is the world's most heavily fortified border, with guards on both sides of the frontier and 1 million or more landmines in between. Once in a while, a North Korean soldier with a specialized knowledge of the DMZ manages to escape. As Craig mentioned, this happened most recently on November 13th in a dramatic and terrifying run for freedom that you can watch on YouTube. And I urge you to do so. It is really quite chilling. But this is very rare. So, to reach South Korea, North Koreans must first go north and west to China. China and North Korea share an 880-mile border. Oh, and by the way, I should also mention that in North Korea, if you want to go from one town to the next, you are required to get a permit from your local authorities to do so. And then when you arrive in that town, the first thing you are required to do is go to the local authorities and check in. This is a rule that is on the books, and it's not followed as often as it was in the past. And that's one example of the authority of the regime breaking down. So in China, North Koreans find that they have traded one circle of hell for another. China's policy is to track down North Korean refugees, arrest them, and send them back to North Korea, where they face imprisonment or worse for the crime of having left North Korea. This policy is both immoral, and it is also in contravention of China's obligations under international treaties it has signed. Nonetheless, life in North Korea is so bad that tens of thousands of North Koreans, perhaps hundreds of thousands, have taken the risk of crossing the border to China. Untold thousands have been repatriated and punished. Some of the North Koreans who are hiding in China decide to risk a second escape, out of China to South Korea. No one can accomplish this feat on his own. The distances across China are too great, and the risk of arrest is too high. This is where the new Underground Railroad comes in. Like the original Underground Railroad in the antebellum American South, the new Underground Railroad is a network of safe houses and secret routes. There are several routes out of China, but the most popular is through Southeast Asia. That means that a North Korean passenger on the Underground Railroad has to travel several thousand miles from the Sino-North Korean border to China's border with Laos or Vietnam or Burma. After crossing illegally into one of those countries, usually by foot, many North Koreans travel illegally into Thailand. Wherever they land, they go to a South Korean embassy or consular facility and ask for help. Under South Korea's constitution, every North Korean is welcome to live in the South. The operators on the Underground Railroad are both human traffickers who are in it for the money and Christians whose religious beliefs impel them to help their North Korean brothers and sisters. I have interviewed a number of heroic Christians who help North Koreans in China. These include local Chinese Christians, as well as Christian pastors and lay people from the United States and South Korea. Helping North Koreans in China is against the law, and rescuers, including Americans, have gone to prison in China for doing so. Steve Kim, a Korean-American businessman from Long Island, is one example. Steve was in the furniture business and living in southern China when he heard about 2 North Koreans who needed help. He took them home with him, he fed them, and he gave them money. Eventually, his apartment became a stopover on the Underground Railroad, and he helped dozens of North Koreans get out of China. He was caught, arrested, and spent 4 years in prison in China. Another example is a courageous pastor from Seattle, Philip Buck. Pastor Buck, another Korean American, operated safe houses in China near North Korea's border, where he and his wife would hide North Koreans who had escaped. And if they wished to try to make it to South Korea, they would prepare them for their journey on the Underground Railroad. For example, Mrs. Buck would teach the women how to use cosmetics so that they would blend in more with the local Chinese population. And that they, of course, would get new clothes and new haircuts so that they wouldn't stand out in China and could not be automatically identified as North Koreans. When Pastor Buck was in Laos with a group of North Koreans he had led out of China, he learned that he had been betrayed to the Chinese authorities. It was too dangerous for him to return to China, but he was determined not to give up his work. Instead, he went home to Seattle, changed his name, and returned to China on a new passport. Eventually, he was arrested, tried, and expelled back home to the United States, where he is continuing his work from afar. A third example is the nonprofit Christian organization Crossing Borders, which is headquartered in Illinois. Crossing Borders has sent missionaries to China, where they operate safe houses for North Korean women and children. And here I'll mention that women form the majority of North Koreans who escape to China. And one of the reasons for this is that there is a market for women. That is, the women are sold as brides to men in China who can't find wives otherwise, and or they also are put to work as sex operators, prostitutes, or video pornography, that sort of thing. Thanks to the Underground Railroad, a large number of North Koreans reached safety in the South in the 2000s. The explosion of arrivals is striking, and it tells you something very important about the difference between then and all the years preceding the 2000s in how closed a society North Korea was. And I'll give you just one point of comparison. In 1990, a grand total of 9 North Koreans arrived in South Korea. 9. In 2011, just 11 years later, 2,737 North Koreans reached South Korea. There are now about 26,000 North Koreans living in the South. And since Kim Jong-un took over in late 2011, the numbers of North Koreans reaching safety in the South has dropped precipitously, the result of Kim's crackdown on the Sino-Korean border. The North Koreans who escape have a huge impact on the world's understanding of their country. In the 15 or 20 years since the new Underground Railroad has been in operation, we've learned a great deal about the country that they left behind. We've learned about the vast prison network in North Korea. We've learned about the apartheid system that classifies every individual according to his perceived loyalty to the Kim regime. And we've learned about the regime's use of food as a political tool, and much, much more. But the escapees are also performing a second, equally important function. They are helping to open up their information-starved homeland. Just as the world now knows more about North Korea, so too North Koreans now know far more about the world outside their borders. This is thanks to the efforts of North Koreans who have escaped. How do they do this? If you think for a minute, if you go to a foreign country, or let's say you want to move somewhere, the first thing any one of us would do, one of the first things, is to call our family and let them know that we're safe and how we're doing. But it's impossible to make a phone call to North Korea. And if you want to send a Facebook message, forget about it. Access to the internet is limited to what is believed to be a grand total of about 1,000 elite North Koreans. So emails or texts or Facebook messages are out of the question. It's even difficult to mail a letter without it being read by North Korean authorities. So the exiles have created a black market in information. Among other things, they will hire Chinese couriers to cross the border and deliver verbal messages to their families in North Korea. Or they might send, via these couriers, cell phones that could access Chinese cell phone signals and give them to their families, and then they'll phone at an arranged time. In South Korea, North Korean exiles have formed organizations whose purpose is to send information into the country. There are 4 radio stations in Seoul run by North Koreans, for example, and they broadcast daily to the north. The radios report on current events and history, and they feature interviews with North Koreans who have escaped about their lives in South Korea. The mantra of the Kim family regime, that North Korea is the greatest, most prosperous nation on earth, and that North Koreans are the world's happiest people, is being exposed for the lie that it is. Other Seoul-based organizations run by people who have escaped find ways to send in DVDs of South Korean soap operas and flash drives containing information. There's even a group that uses hot air balloons to drop information into the north. The DVDs of the South Korean TV shows are particularly subversive, as they show North Koreans the prosperity and the freedom of the world's 13th largest economy, South Korea. It is, of course, illegal in North Korea to watch such DVDs or to listen to the refugee-run radio stations or to read materials that have been dropped by a balloon, but people do so anyway. Kim Jong-un, the current dictator, understands the threat that this invasion of information poses to his rule. One of his first acts after succeeding his father at the end of 2011 was to issue a shoot-to-kill order to guards along the Sino-Korean border. Anyone observed fleeing across the Tumen or Yalu River to China was to be stopped, he commanded. There are also reports that he's trying to stop the information flow into North Korea by forcibly relocating the families of escapees to the interior of the country. That way, they'll be out of the reach of their relatives abroad and can't access Chinese cell phone signals. One of the remarkable aspects of the North Korean diaspora is the high number of men and women who, once they leave the country, choose to become Christians. Protestant missionaries along the Sino-Korean border are highly successful in winning converts. There's no way of knowing how many refugees become Christians, nor is there any way of knowing how many conversions are genuine. but reports by refugees and aid organizations suggest that a high number of North Koreans in China become Christian and that they are sincere in their beliefs. One reason for the attraction of Christianity is easy to pinpoint. Many of the aid groups are run by Christians and funded by churches or Christian organizations from abroad. Put simply, Christians in China are just about the only people who seem to care. In a country where helping North Koreans is against the law, there are few others to whom refugees can turn for protection and support. It's impossible to judge the depth of anyone's faith, but the fervor with which many North Koreans have adopted Christianity is consistent with the enthusiasm with which Christianity has been received in formerly communist countries in Europe after the end of the Cold War. And even in China, which remained communist but is liberated, has liberalized, Christianity is rapidly winning converts, and it's now estimated that there are about the same number of Christians in China as there are members of the Communist Party there. Once a North Korean arrives in South Korea, the government takes over as the principal caregiver, providing an array of services, including a 3-month resettlement program, vocational training, housing, and cash settlements. Yet many of the North Koreans who become Christian in China do not jettison their faith when they reach the South. And there are also examples of North Koreans who convert once they reach the South. Christianity is widespread in the North Korean community there, and there are numerous so-called defector churches, small congregations made up mostly of North Koreans. Asked why so many North Korean refugees become Christians, a North Korean I interviewed cited her own faith journey. Quote, "Not a lot of conversions are genuine at first," she said. And she went on to say that refugees are usually desperate, and some falsely claim to be Christians just to get the aid that they need. And she added, and I think this is an interesting example of Korean culture, North and South, pretending to accept their benefactor's religion is also a way of showing respect and appreciation to the Christians who help them, she said. But as in her case, the message sometimes sticks. There's a seed planted in their hearts, she said, and some become true Christians later on when they reach South Korea or the West. Because they've been exposed to the pastors, to missionaries, to prayer, and the Christian lifestyle, it also has a profound effect on their thinking. I asked her, how so? At first, they can't believe that someone would want to help others for the sole benefit of helping, just for the purpose of serving God, she said. But seeing is believing. Once North Koreans realize that Christians who help them aren't motivated by personal gain and run serious risks by helping them, she said, they are motivated to take a closer look at the religion. The example of Christians who put their faith into action is a powerful recruiting tool. As for the South Korean and American Christians who help North Koreans in China, the most difficult moral decision that a missionary is likely to have to make in China is whether to encourage a North Korean to go back to his country to spread the faith. An unknown number of North Koreans have returned to North Korea as evangelists. Proselytizing in North Korea is life-threatening work. It's inconceivable that North Koreans who return to their country to seek converts are unaware of the risk they're taking. The missionaries who support them in China know that they are sending them into mortal danger. Even so, Christianity appears to be on the rise in North Korea. Among the Christian activists who help refugees, there are countervailing views about how best to deliver the Christian message. The question, put simply, is, do you evangelize in North Korea, or do you evangelize only to those who have escaped? One American Christian leader to whom I spoke believes that carrying the Christian message into North Korea is obligatory. Jesus told us to go into all the world and spread the gospel, he told me. That doesn't mean just the places where we can go with a legal visa, he said. Jesus said, I will build my church and the gates of hell will part. That's what's going on in North Korea. An American lay missionary I interviewed takes a much different view. Yes, we need to send Bibles into North Korea, and I do that, he said. But ever since I started my work with refugees, I very firmly have been of the conviction that the way to help the North Koreans the most is to help them as they come out. It's common sense, he said, that we try to help people once they come out of the iron grip of the regime. That means the refugees. This man is deeply troubled by the practice of sending new Christians back into North Korea to win converts to Christianity. The scripture says flee persecution, he told me. It doesn't say run into it. It doesn't say put a little baby Christian on the tracks where an oncoming locomotive is going to run him over. Let me close with the story of a North Korean boy by the name of Joseph Kim. Joseph escaped to China when he was 14 years old. He was all alone in the world and living on the streets of his hometown in the northern part of North Korea. His father had starved to death. His mother had vanished. His elder sister had gone to China, where she had been sold as a bride to a Chinese man. So, on a dark winter's night, Joseph ran across the frozen Tumen River to China. He knew that it was a serious crime to leave North Korea, but it was a measure of his hunger and his desperation that he decided to risk it. As he ran, he was terrified that he would be shot in the back by North Korean border guards. Once in China, he eventually found his way to a village where he met an elderly woman who spoke Korean. Find a church, she advised him. Church people help North Koreans. What's a church? Joseph asked. The old lady replied, look for a building with a cross on it. Thus began Joseph's odyssey in China. He went into hiding for 2 years, sheltered by a Chinese church. The church put him in touch with a South Korean missionary, who in turn introduced him to a man from an American nonprofit that rescues North Koreans in China. With that organization's help, Joseph got out. Today, he is living in the United States, and he is a senior in college. He is a Christian. A few years ago, I heard Joseph address Liberty in North Korea, the American organization that helped him get out of China. He told them, what you are doing changed my life, and it will eventually change North Korea. Today, I ask you to remember that message as we think about the nuclear and the missile threats from North Korea. They consume most of our attention for understandable reasons. But something else is happening in North Korea that also deserves more of our attention and encouragement. The North Korean people are beginning to stir. Change in North Korea is not an impossible goal. As Joseph's story shows, more than 60 years of oppression have not dulled North Korean people's appetite for freedom. With the help of the North Korean people themselves, those both in exile and those still at home, change in North Korea could happen. The Kim family regime could fall. We in the United States, in South Korea, in the rest of the free world, have a moral obligation to help them. Thank you.
Ms. Kirkpatrick went on the short side.
Craig, talking to the...
Oh, thank you very much.
So our online audience.
Thank you very much. Melanie went on the short side, so we'd have almost 25 minutes for questions. I'll ask her to take the questions herself.
Yep.
And encourage you, or after, if you could keep the questions brief, and then if you could repeat them in the microphone. Thanks.
Okay. Yes, the woman in maroon sweater.
Do you know of any American Christians who have gone into North Korea to
The question is, do I know of any American missionaries who have gone into North Korea to evangelize? There have been there have been several that I'm aware of who have gone into North Korea. One by the name of Robert Park crossed over into North Korea on Christmas Day a few years ago, saying that he was going to help North Koreans, and he had a letter for Kim Jong-un. And I think Jimmy Carter went in and helped get him out, and he was kind of unstable mentally. And then there was another American who went in shortly after Robert Park. And he eventually, maybe he's the one Jimmy Carter brought out, but he eventually came out too. They were both very public about crossing illegally into North Korea, and they were both arrested immediately, but were eventually released. So, they were not subtle about what they were doing. There have been other Americans who have gone in to North Korea on kind of undercover, I guess you would say. There was a tour operator who went in, and he'd been there many, many times. But eventually he was arrested and was jailed for a couple of years before he was released. And as I understand it, and there have been others like him who go in for other reasons. Maybe they get a visa as a teacher, or, well, not a teacher, I guess, but as in the tourist industry or something. And they'll go in, and it's too dangerous to actually meet with North Koreans and pray with them, but they feel somehow that their presence is valuable. And but I'm not aware of anybody who formally goes around and tries to convert people. It's too dangerous, and it's too dangerous for the people that one would meet. There are 4 or 5 state-run churches in Pyongyang, but these are sham churches. They're not real. The congregants are bussed in to the church, or I guess one of them is a Buddhist temple. There are no children there. They're just kind of showcases so that when a foreigner comes to Pyongyang and wants to go to church on Sunday, North Koreans can say, but of course, we have freedom of religion here. Please come to our church. The Catholic Church, for example, has no priest because the Vatican hasn't recognized any priest in North Korea. So it's the answer to that's a long answer to your question, the short answer of which is no. Yes, sir.
Does the North Korean regime have any redeemable qualities?
Oh. Does the North Korean regime have any redeemable qualities? Well, before Kim Jong-un, I might have said they loved their family. But Kim Jong-un has executed his uncle using anti-aircraft guns. He sent assassins into Malaysia to kill his elder half-brother using a banned chemical weapon. So I can't think of a redeemable quality that Kim Jong-un has. He likes basketball, so maybe that's the answer. But on a more serious note, I can't think of any way he's behaved that would indicate to me that there's something to work with there. Yeah, it's he's about as evil as they get, I believe. At the top, yes.
You say like the underground railroads like thriving with people going through it and trying to escape into China and South Korea. Would you say that the underground church itself in North Korea is kind of thriving as well, or is it really suffering?
The question is the underground church in North Korea thriving or suffering? Again, that is a difficult question to answer because we don't have a whole lot of verifiable information. But it seems to be on the rise in North Korea, judging from anecdotal evidence. And there are two categories of Christians there. The catacomb Christians, meaning those who have worshipped in secret now for many years, and then also new Christians. So, you know, you talk to the people I talk to say, oh yes, it's definitely on the rise, but it's very hard to tell. And you do continue to hear occasional reports of Christians who have been arrested in North Korea. So we know the persecution continues. Yes? Yes, sir.
How well would you say that North Koreans are able to assimilate to South Korea, and how are they perceived by South Koreans?
How well are North Koreans able to assimilate in South Korea, and what do South Koreans think of them? The answer to the first question is it's very difficult for North Koreans to fit into South Korean society. If you think about it, the skills that you need to escape North Korea and live in hiding for years, in some cases, in China are very different from the skills you need to be a success in a society like South Korea. For example, initiative. We all know that if you want to get ahead in just about any aspect of life in America, and similarly in a place like South Korea, initiative is going to be helpful to you. But initiative in North Korea gets you killed. So could put your family in danger. So, you know, it's better to lay low and just do what the authorities tell you to do. So that's difficult. Another reason it's difficult for North Koreans is that the majority of them come alone. That means they arrive in South Korea without any family member to support them. And in Korea, both South and North are very family-oriented societies. So for example, the South Korean government will pay tuition for a North Korean to attend college in the North if he can get in. But he won't have his parents' home to live in, or his parents to feed him, or help him pay for his books, or things like that. So that's very difficult. Also, the North Koreans carry a lot of guilt. They, somebody compared it to Holocaust survivors who feel guilty that they're the ones who survive and are thriving while their families perished, or in the case of South Koreans, are still living in this awful place. So that is also difficult, very difficult for them. And finally, just as a practical matter, it's very hard in North Korea because the language has changed a lot over 70 years. The Korean spoken in South Korea now has a lot of English words that have been incorporated into it. That's just one example. But just the whole social context that this rich, highly educated, high-tech country offers is just the opposite of what is found in North Korea. So it's difficult for North Koreans on all those levels. As for South Koreans' attitudes toward North Koreans, my research found a lot of prejudice against North Koreans, and South Koreans have received a mixed message from their governments over the years. In the 2000s, there was the Sunshine Policy, where the government was trying to take a friendly approach to North Korea, and that meant minimizing any talk about the brutality of life in the North and minimizing talk about people who were escaping and all of that, so that for a decade there, South Koreans were not really hearing very much about what was really going on in North Korea. And there's a younger generation that just doesn't have a very good sense of the brutality of the regime. You know, the grandparents' generation remembers the war, but younger generations don't. And finally, I think also the younger generations have this sense that we've lived. They don't feel a responsibility to the North in the same way that the older generations felt. And so they just want to kind of get on with their lives. Again, I think national leadership would help to change that, and perhaps is helping to change that. There's now a TV show on in South Korea, for example, of young North Korean women who, it's kind of a talk show, and they talk about their lives. It's very popular in South Korea. So I think that's an example of how South Koreans are beginning, at least the younger generation, may be feeling more connected to the people in the North. Yes? I have any of the people who escaped from North Korea managed to get any of their family members out? The answer is yes. The about 75%, maybe even more some years, of the North Koreans who make it to the South are women, and many of them have left behind children either in North Korea or in China, where they may have been married or effectively married, living with Chinese men. And this was interesting. I went to the resettlement center and interviewed the head of the resettlement center south of Seoul, who said that the young women who have a child, or even older women who have a child back in North Korea or in China, in a way have it easier because they have something to live for. And so they start to save their money to earn enough money to pay a broker to bring their son or daughter out of North Korea or China. And so you see that more and more, that or to find a missionary who could help them. So you do see that they try to bring their kids out, and I've met a number of reunited mothers and children. Yes, sir.
If change is possible in North Korea, under what kind of scenario would this change take place? They've had famine, they've had natural disasters, and the Kim dynasty is still in charge.
Well, you have a very good point, and every president or every administration since Bill Clinton has been saying, look, if we just wait long enough, this country will collapse on its own, and it hasn't. So why now? I think that there are a few reasons as to why it could happen, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually. And one is this information invasion. The people in North Korea have now a much better sense of what life is like elsewhere, and they realize that they are deprived. And they also realize that the regime has been lying to them for years. There certainly is no organized dissent in North Korea, and the regime is just too brutal. But there is how can I say, a population that might welcome a change. And then you get to the question of the elites in North Korea. Some people say they're only, basically North Korea is run by 500 or 1,000 people. How do you get to them? One of the interesting trends in the past couple of years since Kim Jong-un took over is the number of government officials who have defected. Now, it's really difficult to defect because there are few officials posted abroad, and also, this is a terrible thing, but the government sometimes requires a diplomat to leave one of his children back in North Korea so that the child is an effective hostage. And it means that the parents know that if they defect, the price will be the life of their son or daughter. But the most prominent defection was about a year ago, and the deputy ambassador to the UK defected. And with his wife and 2 sons who were living with him in London. And he has some ideas. He's a very effective spokesman. He speaks excellent English and could be I think has the potential to be a spokesman for the exile community. And he has some ideas about how to get news or the word to people, elite people in the North, that they'll have a better life without Kim than with Kim. I sure hope that our government and South Korea's are making such overtures. It's very difficult, though, and military leaders rarely leave North Korea. Kim Jong-un has not left North Korea since he became the leader. I think he's paranoid that if he goes to China, he'll never go home. Something will happen to him, which would be a good outcome. I think we'd have to work with China on regime change, and China doesn't seem much interested at the moment, though again, you never know. And also, it's going to take a while. And if we had pursued this strategy 10 years ago, it might have been effective. But now we're running out of time, and I'm not sure that we have the luxury of waiting and hoping that the regime will collapse. Oh, well, you already had a question, so let me. Yes.
In case somebody managed to kill Kim Jong-un,
Yeah.
right? And do you think North Korea will change?
The question is, if somebody managed to kill Kim Jong-un, would North Korea change? Yes, I do. I think so. And it's of course possible that he has leaders who he works with who are like him. But we certainly have, at least I don't have any sense of who that might be. We think that the reason he had his half-brother killed was that he was afraid that his half-brother was going to be installed by the Chinese as his successor, because he's a member of the family and would have standing, could be accepted by the Korean people. But there are no other Kim sons that we know of hanging around. The brother who was murdered has a son who is in his 20s and is living, had grown up in China, lives I think in England right now, and he has spoken out eloquently on democracy and freedom. Yeah. And he gets my vote, but well, we'll see. But it's you just don't get access to the guy. He doesn't leave the country. His movements are secret. Even if we wanted to try to kill him. I think it would be an extremely difficult operation to succeed at.
So many people are kind of brainwashed, I heard.
Well,
In the government.
Well, I know that's a typical brainwashing is a typical comment about North Koreans, but I think that's changed dramatically. That people have a much better understanding of reality, and that the brainwash, the robotic movements we see in North Korea are more for show than out of their hearts. Yes.
I remember the Korean War. For the life of me, I can't remember why we got into that, why there was a North and South. Was there a North and South before, or was it one complete?
The Koreas were separated after World War II. Toward the end of World War II, the Russians came into the northern part of the country, and the Americans were in the southern part of the country, and the United Nations decided to well, I guess the United Nations didn't exist then. They decided to have them as two, the North Korea and the South Korea, and then in 1951, Kim Il-sung in the north and his troops invaded the south and started the Korean War, and the United Nations came in to fight. No. One more question? Yes.
I read somewhere that he was educated in Switzerland. Was that true?
Yes. The question is, was Kim Jong-un educated in Switzerland? Yes. He spent a couple of years at a Swiss boarding school, but it didn't seem to have much impact on him except create a love of basketball.
Go back again when he was 18?
No, I don't think so. I think he was a teenager, but I don't know how old he was at that time. He's in his early 30s now, but nobody actually knows the exact date of his birth, so even that is secret. I guess we have room for one more. Yes, sir.
Yes, you say that the numbers of people, the populace, are not really knowledgeable about what's going on. What do you think they can appreciate the potential of thermonuclear engagement? And do they have any thoughts about what they need to do to be able to protect their existence?
No, I don't think so. This is not a country where ordinary people have a voice. So surely they understand that a nuclear war would kill a lot of people. But we don't even know whether, they are believing the rhetoric that comes out of Kim Jong-un's mouth. I have no sense, nor have I heard or read anything about what the North Korean people writ large think about the current situation. You read quotes from individual North Koreans who say, we're going to destroy the United States, but they're, of course, spouting what they've heard their leaders say. Yes?
How sincere is their love for the great leader?
How sincere is their love for the great leaders, the Kim family regime? If it was sincere for the grandfather and father of the current leader, and I'm not even sure what the extent of that sincerity was, I think Kim Jong-un is different. He's times are very hard in North Korea, and he's I have the sense that he's not as well respected. He's young, of course, and by the way, there are rumors that he had plastic surgery to make himself look more like his grandfather, to give him more authority. You don't nobody would dare to speak out against a member of the Kim regime. That's really verboten, and it's cause for very serious punishment. But the sense you have is that this guy is not respected, in part because people now see what other countries are like, especially South Korea and China. They think of China, and they've been told this for 75 years, as their brother nation. Communist, very poor 75 years ago, but now China's rich. And people ask themselves, well, if China can do it and still be communist, what's wrong with North Korea? So I think that is making them a little more, much more skeptical of the leadership of the family. Thank you very much.
Before you leave, just if I could just make 4 quick announcements. It's wonderful to see a number of hands still going up. And the good news is that the questions you're going to ask are all answered in this book. So I encourage you, if you have any interest, it's really an amazing book. That's number 1. Number 2, thank you for taking time to come out tonight. Thank you very much. Number 3, encourage you to come out next week. Mindy Belts, who's the editor of World Magazine, the senior editor of World Magazine, is going to talk about her book. It's called They Say We Are Infidels: On the Run from ISIS with Persecuted Christians in the Middle East. It's a really great book. She's a person who is, very familiar with the Muslim community and the Christian community, and so she's not. It's not a peculiarly or weirdly partisan book. It's just very, very engaging. So
and it's very personal about her own interactions with Christian families.
I mentioned to her, when I asked Minnie Belts if she'd come and speak, but I already talked with Melanie. Melanie was coming. I mentioned Melanie was coming, and I got an email back saying, she's my hero. Which I thought, okay, well, all of a sudden I like 2 people more now, which is great. But please come out for that. And the 4th thing just to mention is, gosh, thank you very, very much. We really appreciate it. Drive carefully. Thanks. Please join me again.